Okay, good morning. Welcome to BCube Sunday morning. Good news is we're here. The bad news is we're late, and it's not the fault of any of the guests other than for being so endearing and engaging because we were sitting here chatting and then all of a sudden realized that, holy cow, it's 9:08. So I'm sorry, and Cliff,
That's
uh,
okay. It's 9:09 now, so I've got a Beatles song going through my head. Guess which one?
okay.
You're
Well,
traveling on the one after 9:09. Do 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 do
okay.
do.
I'm going to turn on the comment section because there's been a couple of times in life where the system has said, hey, we're not going to let it work. And people said, oh, well, they're not there. And they've gone up and changed the channel. So now I'm glad that we're here. The channel isn't changed. And you guys introduce your guests, Clifford.
All right, computer saying that things aren't going to work. Oh my goodness. All right, so
Oh,
my guests today are wonderful returning writers Deborah J. Ross, who is the author of a bunch of books. Most recently, the last ever Darkover book, which is she's about to hold up. Yep, which you move it over that way. Yeah, Arlen. Yes, the last over the third in a trilogy, and you did three trilogies, right? So,
Actually, this is the last three were completely standalone.
oh, okay. So the
First
last three are
three
standalone,
were, yeah, I've done 9 of them, and
right?
I think 6 Darkover anthologies.
Yeah,
I
a
think.
bunch, and a bunch of short stories that were printed in like the various multi-author Darkover anthologies. Anyway, she's done a lot of original works. The Lambda nominated, Lambda finalist, I should say, collaborators, as well as some works that were originally published under Deborah Wheeler, some of which I think are now republished by Bookview Cafe under Deborah J. Ross, correct? Like
Yeah.
some of them, like Jadium.
Yeah, JDM and Northlight. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's a very storied writer whose books have been published by Daw and other fine publishing houses. Her stories have been published by the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction and other fine publications. And she can be found at all decent bookstores. And I will stand by that. If a bookstore doesn't have her work, it's a little sus. Okay, so as the kids say, and then my other author guest is C.L. Kagm, and she is the author of numerous short stories, some of which are collected in Twiceborn, but many of which were published in places like Analog, right, beforehand.
Yes, yes.
You know, so she's a solidly good writer. She also has a secondary career co-authoring nonfiction and other works. And so that is. Do you don't use the? Do you use the C.O. Kagm byline when your name is in the copyrighted places, or for those?
Occasionally, if it's a speculative fiction thing, yeah.
Okay. So, but usually, yeah, she ghostwrites or collaborates with someone and on those. So she's got a number of books under her belt as well. And the reason I have asked these wonderful people here today is to discuss the topic of this podcast, which is building and maintaining writer communities. Now, there are lots of different kinds of writer communities, just like there are lots of different kinds of writers. All of us seem to have an aversion to writing, but other than that, there's very little that unites writers, except our quirky personalities, our penchant for too much coffee, being up at odd hours. Speaking of writer communities, Locus, which this was from last year's kind of PBS style pledge drive that they did. This year, they're not doing that because it takes so much time and resources, but they are inviting people to do end of year donations to the Locust Foundation, which is, I think, a 501c charity. So check it out at locustmag.com, org, something. Anyway, it was unexpected for me to plug Locust, but I wasn't prepared for that. But anyway, so the topic is building writer communities. CL Kagm, who I'm going to call Claire because that's easier than saying
That's what
CL.
C stands for.
Yes, that's what the C stands for. So Claire built, and for a while during in the wake of lockdown, created and maintained a critique group, which is kind of a standard writer thing where you turn in stories or novel chapters and you critique each other's work. And we did it over Zoom. So that eventually didn't hold together, which we can talk about that. But it was replaced by another critique group over Zoom that we are both in now. That's organized by the wonderful Lyda Morehouse. So we could talk about critique groups, and then Deborah, along with Juliet Wade, who is currently living in Australia, and I think it's like 4 a.m. there, so I didn't ask her on. But Deborah and Juliet created an in-person social and support writer group where we met for brunch once a month.
Mm-hmm.
And it was originally, what was the title originally? Women
The Lady
Writers?
Writers Lunch. Because originally
Lady
it was
Writers
me
Lunch.
and Juliet, and then we made you an honorary lady.
Yes, and I was proud to be an honorary. You were like, we could change the name, and I'm like, don't change the name. I'll be a lady. I'm mad enough to join the Ladies Writer Lunch. And so there I was, being like basically a Sasquatch sitting there with all the ladies. And that went on. That was an in-person thing, and it went until lockdown, and then during the aftermath of lockdown, people, moved away to Australia or otherwise out of the Bay Area, and so that group doesn't exist anymore. But that was an external thing, and it went for years and years, and was a wonderful support. And we still talk to each other and are friends and support each other, and even across oceans and continents, we still do that. So that's what we're here to talk about. So if you know any writers and you are a writer and you're feeling isolated and alone, because by nature, writing is pretty much one person sitting somewhere by themselves writing, or maybe they're standing, taking a walk and narrating into a device such as this with something like Dragon, text to speech or speech to text, and narrating. Some people do that. Barbara Cartland, the famous romance writer of the 1970s that my mom liked, used to narrate into a dictaphone and have her assistant type up her books. So that's another thing. But essentially, these are solitary activities, and we are not solitary animals. We are social animals. Even the most introverted of us are at least a little bit social, at least sometimes, at least on their own terms. So with that overly long-winded introduction, why don't we start with Deborah? And when you and Juliet got together and were like, we could do something that's not a critique group, and that might be of value. Could you talk about how that came about?
Mm-hmm. Well, before I do that, I'm going to push back about the solitary nature of writing, which is that there is a third kind of writer community, which is co-writing, which is not collaborating. It's co-writing. And when I was thinking of my own experience as a writer, I started writing stories down in, 3rd or 4th grade. And then in high school, my favorite way to hang out with my friends was we would all sit around on somebody's bed with our portable typewriters on our laps, pounding out our little fangirl stories. Well, this was the early 60s, so we didn't even know.
Wow.
That kind of activity goes on now. Most Sundays, Ciiff has I forget what they call it, a writing date. It's hosted by various people at various times, and basically you check in, and then you write everybody on their separate computer for 20 minutes or however long it is, and then you check back in. Inkers Con did a writing challenge earlier this year, which was to write 10,000 words in 1 week. And it was amazing. It was structured like the Ciiff one, only less chit chat. Basically, 2 sessions a day. You check in. What's your goal for the next 25 minutes? You write like crazy for 25 minutes. You check in. How are you doing on your goal? You write again for 25 minutes. You do that twice a day for 5 days in a row.
Wow.
Well, I didn't think I could do it. I wrote 14,000 words. The energy of everybody's screens open and everybody focused was just amazing.
So that was an in-person thing, right?
No, it was Zoom.
Oh, that was Zoom? Okay, so back in, you were reminding me that back when my youngest kid was in preschool and I would drop my older kids off at school, I would then sometimes take said youngest kid to Barnes and Noble because we discovered mutually that he loves croissants. Like, I don't know if he was French in a previous lifespan or what, but he loves croissants even as a toddler. And so we would go to the Barnes and Noble cafe, and I kept noticing that, and it was random days, and I noticed that on Tuesdays there tended to be a bunch of people with their laptops and have moved the tables together. And after a couple of months of, 3 or 4 times, I'm like, and it was towards November, right? And I was like, because it was started with the school year, right? And I'm like, are you guys NaNoWriMo by any chance? And yes, they were a NaNoWriMo meetup group that was meeting every Tuesday at the Barnes and Noble. And they did it all year round, not just November. And when it wasn't November, they were more chatty. And when it was November, they were more typey. But they brought their laptops and they wrote together, like at a long table with their coffee. And like a writer would do as a solitary thing in a coffee shop, they did as a group. And I know that NaNoWriMo, the organization, has fallen into ill repute for allegedly good reasons. I don't really know too much about it. But these people in their individual group are awesome humans. And I rarely actually get the chance to sit there on a Tuesday and type with them, but when I do, I find it very rewarding. And they're wonderful, and they're still meeting. So yes, croissants are the bomb, especially bombs shaped like croissants. Anyway, which I imagine the French military manufactures. Anyway, which is not nearly as scary as the poutine-shaped Canadian bombs. But anyway.
So there's.
So yeah, that's a great community.
Yeah, there are in-person or video co-writing venues, and some of them are open like to anybody with Ciiff membership. There is no reason why you can't set that up with a friend, with a writer friend. So Juliet Wade and I became friends a gazillion years ago when we were on a panel at BayCon. And conventions are a wonderful way to network with other writers, whether it's the writer's workshop and that many conventions offer, or just you see somebody on a panel or they see you and you just chat afterwards. Wow, you're a really interesting person. That's what I did to Juliet. I said, I really liked what you had to say, and let's go have coffee. And we hit it off so well that, let's find a place equidistant, because I live way up in the redwood forest and she lived in a more civilized place. And anyway.
From the valleys to the forest.
Yeah, we started for lunch at a place which was an equally long drive for us. And that became the lunch. And it became clear that we were not interested in critiquing each other's stories. We were not interested in writing together at that point in time. We were interested in just supporting each other. And it was a bit more social. I'm actually in 2 other Zoom groups, one of which meets like every other month, and the other meets a couple of times a month, that are career support. And that's really important
That
because
is great.
careers never go the way you want. And just having a safe place to vent, to get support, to get ideas can be crucial. Anyway, when Juliet moved to Australia, we wanted to stay in better touch. So now we have a writer date that's, across the Pacific Ocean. Video chatting is, in my mind, has really transformed our ability to create and maintain writer communities, whether it's just 2 friends holding each other accountable. We are now going to write. And if you get up and start messing around, I see you. Or a group where you can say, my agent just retired, what am I going to do? Or I can't find an agent, what am I going to do? Or just, I got a terrible review, I just want somebody to understand how awful it is, whatever.
Yeah.
That's
and so that was the 2 of you.
Yeah.
And that became sort of mini community. And then I met you after I was doing a reading at BayCon, or was it BayCon or was it World Fantasy? It was in San Jose, so it was World Fantasy, I think. And I did a reading. I happened to be, one of the author reading slots where they slot like 5 people in. And Juliet was one of the readers.
Costume?
Yes, because I was reading my steampunk Martian steampunk story, which I tended to put on a steampunk costume with just for the fun of it, and put on my best fake British, actually several fake British accents for the different characters, the different social classes, including some Irish kids. And so, who were, I guess they weren't from, I don't know if they were from Northern Ireland, so whether they're technically British or Irish, I don't know. But anyway, there were several British characters, English characters of different kinds. And I put on that as a visual, because it was fun and because I had a steampunk outfit and it was an excuse to wear it. So I had done that first because when we had the book launch, it was in an anthology. We had the book launch party in Pasadena, and which is about a 5-hour drive. 5.5-hour drive from my house. So I drove and I joined the editor and about 5 authors. And I asked her in advance, because it was like Halloween. It was like late October. And I said, can I wear a costume? Because it's Halloween. And she said, sure. So I brought my steampunk outfit, changed into it, and did my reading in steampunk. And I loved that experience so much. And I had so much fun doing it that I recreated that at the convention. Anyway, so I don't remember what Juliet read, but I remember being impressed. I think it was one of her analog stories about the trade pact universe, whatever she calls the name of that. What's the name of the universe? Yeah. Which has fabulous aliens based on different animals. And it's just wonderful. And linguistics. And it's just, it's great analog stuff. And cool characters on top of that. So anyway, she was reading one of those, and I read my steampunk thing, and then I guess the 2 of you talked amongst yourselves, and the 3 of us had lunch. And I remember at the end of lunch, you were like, "So we have this ladies' writer thing. We'd be willing to change the name." And I'm like, "You don't have to change the name, but I would be honored." That was my recollection of the events. And then there were 3, and that 3 makes absolutely makes a community, right? 2 is a community, but 3 is even more of a community. And then we got to about 6 or 7 for a while there, and it got a little large.
Yeah.
So I think optimal was maybe 5.
I wouldn't set a number, because sometimes you have a group where you might have a core of 1 or 2 or 3, and then you have people that kind of come and go. And
and we were more like that. I guess we had the 3 of us would come every month, and then other people when they made it. Wendy started coming, I think, more regularly. towards the end before COVID shut everything down. And the brunch place we used to go to no longer serves brunch, and anyway. So it
You
was
outlived the brunch place.
it was a hotel restaurant that was open for brunch and lunch and dinner, and but you didn't have to be staying at the hotel. Like there was free parking if they would valet your parking if you went to the restaurant.
Nice.
In Los Gatos, downtown Los Gatos, and it was wonderful. And we had the same waiter most of the time, and he was wonderful, and we all and the same guy doing cover music.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that sounds delightful.
So I would come up and do Beatles songs with him. So
I'm getting inspired hearing about this because they do have in Chicago what they call shut up and write groups, where you go to a coffee shop and the theory is that you all just sit there and write. But the problem is that because it's a lot of people who aren't publishing professionally and it's in a public place, they become more social than intended very often. So I'm being inspired by this idea of a Zoom-based thing where we watch each other and it's like, I see you, I can't tell what you're doing, but it looks like you might be Googling dinosaurs instead of writing. So
Googling dinosaurs is writing, I'm going to point out, especially since Kate Johnston is co-editing an anthology of dinosaurs with the
excellent.
In January.
Excellent.
Space dinosaurs, I think. Dinosaurs in the future. Anyway.
I accept a certain percentage of Googling dinosaurs, but after a certain point, I'm like, so what's your word count?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. But why don't you talk about deciding to create a critique group and how you figured out who was going to be in it and all that? And this was during COVID lockdown, so we were doing Zoom. We're all over the country.
Yeah. The hearing about the Zoom base is definitely also inspiring to me because I've actually never done a co-writing group via Zoom. I don't know why. I was in the habit of attending them before the pandemic, and then it just never occurred to me that was something you could do remotely after the pandemic. So that is very useful. I started a critique group back in the day. I've been very, very fortunate with my critique groups. Every single one I've had has been fantastic, and that's one reason that I wanted to discuss this subject, because I know several writers who are brilliant writers, but they have a lot of anxiety about critique groups. I unfortunately do hear about people having some bad experiences with critique groups. So I've been really fortunate since I was in high school to have really fantastic critique groups. Always attract the speculative fiction types, but I do suggest that kind of having your critique group fit your target audience is a good idea, because every now and then, we would have the one historical fiction from a time period none of us were familiar with author, and we'd be like, we like your writing, but we don't feel like we're being very useful because we're not your core target audience and we don't have their expectations. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I've been very fortunate to be in critique groups with wonderful people like Ciiff, and I've tried to put my finger on why all of my critique groups have been wonderful, because that's not the universal reality that I hear, but I think a lot of it does have to do with just forming critique groups with people who you generally like and trust. It seems like a lot of the time when I hear critique group horror stories, they're very, very public critique groups where just anyone off the street can come join the group, which is a great access point for new writers, but it does seem to lead to some unpredictability around what people are going to, think the social conventions of a critique group are. So,
well, let me jump in with a question. So, Do you find it's easier to maintain a critique group if the writers are roughly the same level?
Roughly the same
point in their career, like pros, neo-pros, amateurs who are trying to become published for the first time, that sort of thing?
I actually really like to do mixed career level critique groups. This again is where I'm inviting, and it's not necessarily anyone off the street can come in. But I really like to introduce people who I know are fantastic writers, people who are getting published, which unfortunately is something else that I've seen missing in some groups. I've seen a lot of groups that are either all very, very professional writers that have similar problems, which is something that is great to be able to discuss with people. But it's also like we're all in similar stages, so there's not a lot of sort of transmission of wisdom, I guess is the term I'm looking for. And I've also seen a lot of groups that are all amateurs who have never published anything, and there is again that kind of no one is really prompting people to level up because it isn't something any of them have done. So I really do like mixed level groups, which is what I did with our group, where we had a number of very accomplished writers, including you and some of our friends, and then a couple of writers who had no real prior publishing experience but were very good writers. I think one of the mutual friends that we're talking about who someday will have a pen name that we can share.
Yes.
But yeah, so I really like, as a personal preference, doing the mixed level group, and I do actually think it's good for the quality of critique as well. One of the interesting things I find is that the groups that don't have professionals in them often actually spend more time really, really kind of almost agonizing over choices of words, whereas the professionals often have a much more like let it fly. The missing piece to your writing career isn't always the word craft. Sometimes it's the submitting it and putting it out there. So I really like that balance of attitudes that you get.
Which is where the support takes place, whether it's in a critique group where you become friends and support each other. Like my critique group that met in person before COVID and has met only rarely since COVID. We became such a community that when my wife was pregnant with our first, they threw me a baby shower with a cake and everything like that, right? Like it was, I show up to the critique session and there's a cake and a baby shower. So that was fun, right? And you become a community, right? But it's also really important, like what we did with Deborah and Juliet's group was we would order our food, we would get a little caffeinated, and then we would do a check-in in whatever order you wanted to and talk about what was going on in our lives. And it didn't have to be writing related because, it's all a unified thing. What happens in your life affects your writing life, and what happens in your writing life affects your life, right? Like I know if I don't get to write, I get grumpy. And so that affects my whole life, not just that portion of it. It's not it's not atomic, right? Writing is not a puzzle piece you can remove or add to the rest of your life. It is part of the web of who we are as creative artists. There are different kinds of art that I think there's a real, as much as you can sit and be social and write together, there are two kinds of overall kinds of art. There's the in the moment performative art like theater or dance or something like martial arts, which is an art, right? And then there is like a kind of tends to be solitary studied art like painting, sculpture, writing, right? And those, even if they lead to the other, right? Like you could be a playwright sitting by yourself writing, and then you give that script to a cast and they do the in-person thing. You could be a composer, right? Who composes by yourself and then brings it to the band and performs it as a real-time art, right? So there's crossover, but in general, right, there are two kinds of, like, there's prepared, multiple drafts, all the time in the world to finish your painting or your sculpture, or chisel this one little bit, or rewrite that scene 50 times or whatever. And then there's the, in the moment, like you're on stage doing something, right? And you're there. So because writing is in that former camp, the social aspect of like being on, like one of my kids is on a dance team, right? Part of being a team. Another kid does musicals and being part of a cast, right? Those are very, very social, right? And if you're introverted, it might be a little difficult at times, right? But the theater kids tend to be like the loudly extroverted people, even if they're the loudly extroverted nerds. And being on a sports team. Another one of my kids was on a baseball team last year, and those are things that lend themselves to the community experience by the nature of what they are, right? But if you are not that, you have to create the community. Like the Impressionists banded together and created their own art show, right? Which was in opposition to the Academy. And they hung out together at cafes because painting is more or less a solitary thing, right? And sometimes they even painted each other painting, which is pretty cool, right? Like a couple of paintings of like Monet painting or Manet painting or whatever, and composers also. When I was in Germany, we went to Leipzig, and I got to go to the cafe where a bunch of composers used to hang out together and sit and drink and eat and talk, right? And they some of them were Kapellmeisters, choir masters who had a choir, and sometimes they would conduct an orchestra, which means they're part of a performing community. But when they composed, they were generally speaking with music paper and a pen and an ink and sitting somewhere writing music. Mozart being the exception, he would compose while playing billiards in the bar. So he was a very social writer of music.
Why does that not shock me?
No, right? Yeah.
I actually have been sitting here thinking about the Claire's comments about mixed level of proficiency critique groups, because in all the critique groups I've been in, that has never been part of the design or the intention. And sometimes it works out well to just have a grab bag that the most important thing is that people are actively writing and they're treating this in a professional manner regardless of their publication. But very early in my career, I was in a group that was, I think it started with a couple of Clarion grads and then some people that had been to an adult education creative writing course, and then let's do an ongoing group sort of thing. And I got invited through, this was well before people did stuff on the internet. So there was a workshop by mail that Kathleen Dalton Woodbury had organized. And this was pretty amazing.
That's like Jurassic technology.
Really, but you exchanged printed manuscripts, and then there was a little newsletter with articles on craft and world building and stuff like that. And Kathleen's pretty amazing, but this was, so I met people like, that's when Catherine Asaro and I became friends, and Mary Rosenblum and a bunch of people.
Nice.
We were just getting started. Anyway, so I got invited to this group, and it was a mixed genre group. There were speculative fiction writers. There was a mainstream writer who was actually very good, and a mystery writer. And what happened was that some of us came in with publications experience. I think I had sold a couple of short stories. So this must have been the late 80s. And some people's careers took off, and some people's careers languished. And we didn't address that. There was no format for looking at how this would affect the social interactions and
Right, because it's by snail mail.
style. So actually, I was one of the people that my career took off, and I got one. I've told Cliff this story. I got one critique of just this heartfelt story that I was crying the whole time I was writing it. And this is such a piece of sentimental twaddle, and I can't even begin to critique it. Was a critique that
I would argue a critique that breaks the social contract of critiquing.
Yeah. Anyway, that story was not only published in Asimov's, but it got honorable mention in Year's Best SF, which is probably the best revenge possible.
The best revenge.
Yeah,
yes.
It's exactly right what you said, Cliff. We were breaking the social contract of we are here to encourage each other at whatever level we are. And somebody with no publishing credits could give incredibly valuable feedback. And all voices are valuable. Plus, how do you deal with that? I think it's envy rather than jealousy.
Yeah, and
that's
thank you for sharing that story, because a lot of the people I know who are really anxious about joining critique groups, it's because they've experienced or seen something like that. And there is, unfortunately, I think, this attitude in some corners that the more superior I feel to someone else's work, the better my taste must be. But your story is such a perfect representation, because some of the pieces that I have, even myself, gotten the harshest criticism of from some corners, have also been very well liked by the professional realms. So everyone in the audience, I want you to listen to this. Just because someone harshly critiqued your story does not necessarily mean that it's not going to be well loved by professional editors, because there is, unfortunately, in some circles, this attitude that the more I can find wrong with other people's stories, the better my writing must be, and the more discerning my palette must be. And that's one of the reasons that I haven't been in a critique group that is just open to the public in a while, because there is establishing a social contract is really important, and that's easier to do in a semi-closed group with some screening process.
Yeah, so I will say, because Deborah mentioned Clarion, which is a 6-week science fiction writing workshop. There's Clarion West and there's Clarion East, which is now actually in San Diego, and so they're in Seattle and San Diego. But they're 6 weeks, and they go in the summer, and you have to apply to get in. There are limited number of seats available, and you submit some stories, and you either get in or you don't get in, and if you don't get in, you try again. I found that there's it was originally based on the Milford science fiction writing workshop critique method, which then Clarion adopted, and I learned at Clarion. And I have modified it when I teach a writing workshop or when I am part of a critique group, so that if I'm moderating the workshop, I get to dictate this, but if not, I just do it myself. I open my critique with something I liked about the draft, right? And I also refer to the story as the draft, because if it were a perfect, finished, polished story, it wouldn't be sent to the critique group. You would send it to an editor, or if you're an indie author, you would publish it. I refer to it as a draft, and I say, okay, this is what I really liked about this draft, and then here are some things which you can think about for the next draft that might make it that might improve the next draft, right? And that frames the whole thing in a way that is not possible to tear someone down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you'd have to work really hard to be vicious and mean in that kind of situation. And I guess if you manage it, then I'd try to get you out of the group. But it would be challenging to try and game that, right? I try to make it harder. I often teach, fairly often teach critique things of writers' workshops for conventions, in which there are about 4 or 5 writers in me. And because I am not the most, I don't have books out, I just have stories out, and I have, a little over a dozen published stories over the years. So I'm not a big name writer. I get the students I get are the beginners. They're the neophytes. They've either published 1 or 2 things or not published anything at all, which is fine because I get to mold fresh minds. But also because I get to work with these people who are enthusiastic and really just like they're loving this, and I actually know more about the publishing industry than they do, and can therefore actually be useful, which always astounds me. Like, what? Everyone doesn't know how this works? Oh, that's right, they don't. I have to tell them. So that's fine. So anyway, yeah, I put that philosophy into my critique groups, and I remember being very satisfied. The last in-person writing workshop I did for FogCon, the students who were in that workshop, who were together with me for 3 hours tops, 4 hours with snacks, they formed a community and kept in touch by email, and they, I don't know if it lasted, but they went off together and they were a group. So that was nice. I mean, that was all them, but it was nice to get a ringside seat to it, So I guess what I'm saying is writing communities can begin either very deliberately, like, Claire, when you started the critique group post COVID over Zoom, you picked people you knew and who thought would work well together, right?
Yeah.
And Deborah, you and Juliet just kind of hit it off. And then when you pulled me in, you didn't go to the convention thinking, what writers can we pull into our group? You just met me at random. We had lunch. We weren't at each other's throats by the end of lunch. So you're like, well, I could have lunch with this person again on a regular basis, right? And so that was less intentional than it was serendipitous, right? So.
Yeah, and it's interesting because part of my model for my critique groups is actually based on a group that formed in my high school that was kind of serendipitous, where we realized that there were a bunch of people in these literature classes and theater programs that all wanted to write science fiction and fantasy. And that was a really good first experience for me. So I am here for the serendipity.
I will also say that if you're like a playwright, if you want to write plays, or I don't know so much about scripts, but I know that there are communities of playwrights that do meet and talk. And I'm not in those communities, but they're there, right? And the playwrights have an interesting relationship because most, like prose writers, we know editors, or if you're indie, editors and cover designers and things like that. But playwrights know theater companies, right? They tend to work with the local theater companies. And so you might have, I do know one playwright who's had like plays put on in completely other countries, right? But they, you're often in a situation where you're working with this local repertory company and that local repertory, and so you'll know each other. You'll know the directors and some of the actors and things like that. So that's also a community kind of thing that can happen, and that's more or less unique to playwriting. and musicals, because movie industry is very different, and the television industry is very different, and the prose world is very different. But those are things, right? And if you're in film, you might at college, especially if you go to some place like CSU, where there's a lot of film industry people, you'll meet other writer directors, right? Because you're probably going to direct whatever you write in college because it's a student film project, right? And you'll meet some actors, and you'll get to know the community there, and you'll meet.
I bet those are interesting
lighting
parties.
people and whatever, cinematographers. So there are a lot of moving parts that make a movie. So we are getting. We started a few minutes late, so hopefully Bob will let us run a few minutes if that's okay with the two of you. But anything else you want to talk about? Because I feel like I've been talking more than I usually talk, and I don't want to do that. I want y'all to talk. So any other things that we haven't hit, or stuff from the... I'm going to read through somebody talk while I read through the comments, see if I can find it.
All right.
Tap dance.
Yeah, it's been really inspiring to hear about your experiences, Deborah. And one experience that I wanted to share as well is that part of what turned me on to having like multi-level critique groups, because I definitely started out in the like all unpublished authors realm. But when I actually was a Writers of the Future winner in 2016, and that had a very interesting effect, because suddenly I did have access to professional writers who were talking about not just how do we improve our word craft, but how do we, get published? How do we build our kind of genre portfolio, and when is a story ready to fly? So that had a huge effect on me, because that just wasn't a way that my critique groups that were all unpublished authors were thinking. And that was something that I really wanted to kind of pay forward, because I knew so many writers who were really, really good writers, but I wasn't sure if anyone had given them really serious, like, strategic publishing advice. So that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about the group that Cliff and I were in. And the one that's no longer running, we're still in a group now, which is wonderful. And it's something that I do look to recreate now that I have some, publishing know-how, because I think there are so many writers groups that are really great about critiquing wordcraft, but the professional side, if that's a goal for people, is hard to really help people with if you haven't experienced it,
Sure, but if you have a mixed group, the people who have experience can tell the people who haven't what to expect. One comment, Andrew J. Lucas writes, "We had a small RPG, that's role-playing game, writers community in Vancouver in the 90s, collaborated on leads and projects, gave advice, and gamed together." That's one thing game writers can do, is game together. Published a little magazine, Adventures Unlimited. So that's really cool. First of all, that's really cool, and that is kind of unique to RPG. This is tabletop RPG writing, in that you can do a role-playing game together with your writer buddies, and that can be fun, and also bonding, and also help in ways with your writing. I know I used to Dungeon Master and Game Master a fair bit, and then I discovered through trial and error, as one does, that my gaming brain, especially my game mastering brain, and my writing brain were the same brain, and they were a limited resource, and I had to rob Peter to pay Paul. So I kind of made a strategic decision that I could create this cool adventure and make 6 or 7 people really happy, and we could have a great time together. Or I could write a story, and then first of all, the protagonists don't go off and do things I don't expect and annoy me, which players always do because that's part of the fun. It's half improv theater. And I could then write this story and sell it, and maybe a few hundred or a few thousand or maybe even a few tens of thousands of people could enjoy it, right? And for me, people create art for different reasons. Some people create it for themselves. Some people create it because it is something they do. It's in their nature, and this is true for me. It's in my nature. I just can't not do it. But also, I create writing to hopefully communicate something to people, make their lives improved in some way. Even if I'm writing a sad story, something that would like add poignancy to someone's life, right? And so the numbers game is kind of important to me because I would like to affect the world as much as I can in a positive way. I mean, it'd be great if I wrote a New York Times bestseller and made a lot of money, but that is of secondary interest to me than like it would be great if I wrote a New York Times bestseller and people read it, right? Like, and it meant something to people. Like when somebody says that there was one story that I sold a couple of years ago. It was the title story for High Noon on Proxima B from Baen Books, edited by David Boop. And there's a character who dies in that story, and I won't say who, maybe more than one, I don't know. But there's a character that, and multiple people, like 3 or 4 people who were in, like, that I knew or whatever, it would be like, I cried when that character died. And I'm just like, oh, thank you. You have made my week. You know, I was sad when that character died. I didn't want that character to die, but that character had to go. So, you know, it was part of the price. That
Well, leads you to an interesting question, which is that we've been talking about communities of writers.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, the writer is part of a community with the readers.
Yes.
Especially when
Talk about that.
Reader takes the time to let the author know what a difference. I think the most moving fan letter I ever got was for Hasterlord, which has a polyamorous relationship at the center. And because there are 2 men who are lovers, and then one of them is married to a woman, the reader used the story to come out to their father. And I absolutely bawled when I read it. I had no idea I could make such a difference in someone's life. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a community. Actually, the fan was out on the West Coast for a trip, and we actually had lunch together.
Oh, that's awesome.
Really
And did it work out? Was it helpful? The coming out, did it work out?
Yes.
Yes. That's wonderful.
Read the book and talk about it, and it wasn't so much this as it was
Right.
both of them looking at the story.
Nice. That's wow. You win. Right? Like
I did good.
you win at life when you do something like that.
Yeah. I increased the goodness of the world, which is
Right. Which is
goal. Yeah.
the goal of any artist, right? Even if you're writing tragedy, even if you're writing something that's extremely angry, you know, you're still trying to increase the goodness of the world in some way, you know, to make a positive difference in the lives of people, to communicate something through art that is better communicated through the art of story than, you know, whatever. There's a community based that Daniel Marcus created, and then Laura Blackwell shortly thereafter joined him as co-creator, called the Story Hour, where every Wednesday night at 7:00 Pacific, 2 people read, and we don't talk about it. Although people who join the Zoom rather than watch it later on YouTube or Facebook Live or whatever, the people who watch it later, and it's not on YouTube, it's just Facebook Live, can make comments, but during the actual event, if you log into the Zoom as an audience member, you can make comments about the stories and talk sort of in the chat about what's going on. And that is a community that we've had repeat, writers. I'm going to be on there again next year for the second time as a reader. I guest hosted it once, but it's been going on, started during COVID, which is why it's Story Hour 2020. I think .com or .org. Again, I can't remember, but you'll be able to find it. And that's a community. And, it's made a positive difference to people. And they refer to it as, as like basically the virtual equivalent of sitting around the campfire telling stories, right? Mm. Some people call storytelling the second oldest profession because it's, and it's probably even older than that. But it's, sitting around in the Paleolithic, sitting around the campfire with your mammoth meal, pun intended, and telling stories, right, under the stars. There's a direct line from that to science fiction, which is why that scene is so powerful in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the bone goes in and it becomes a spaceship, because there's a direct line. So anyway, that's my 2 cents about that. But that's a wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that story about the reader. It is now towards the end where Bob is about to come on. So I'm going to ask for final comments, and also please plug any art or other project you would like to plug. I know, Deborah, you have a new book out that you want to tell us about.
Sure, I can do that.
So final comments or thoughts about writing community, and then also plug whatever you want.
There's a story called The Wranglers versus the Stranglers, about two writing clubs in two different Ivy League colleges, and one of them was they were different genders, but that's not the important thing. One of them gave very critiques. There was blood and red ink all over the place consistently, and they thought that they were showing how tough they were, and this is how you do it. And the other group was very soft and encouraging and cheering on, and almost never had anything bad to say about anything. And I was the Wranglers. The Stranglers produced not a single writer of any note. The Wranglers, maybe a little constructive criticism might have been good, but they didn't do that. They just cheered people on, and they produced a number of writers whose work has endured over many decades. That's what I have to say about that.
I like it. Claire?
Do I plug my book now, or? Yeah.
Why don't we go round once on that and then plug? Yeah. Claire?
All right. Yeah, I love what Deborah said. It's I've been fortunate to encounter very encouraging people in writers' critique groups, but I do not find it hard to imagine that consistently telling someone their work isn't good enough is going to be a discouragement to publishing. And one of my favorite things I think that I've seen in a writers community is when people come to the group and say, I know there's a problem with this draft, but I know you can help me fix it. That level of trust, I think, is really powerful for writers everywhere. So I really appreciate that, and that is what I like to think that a lot of writers communities aspire to.
Yeah. So I'm going to add something that one of the commenters sort of reminded me of the existence of. There's another kind of writer community called 2 Hour Transport, which started pre-COVID, I gather, in a cafe or in the Seattle area. And then with COVID went online on Zoom, and it's an open mic night with featured readers. So they invite, happens once a month, and they invite, it's 2 hours long. It transports you into another universe for 2 hours, and you. The first hour is open mic, and then the second hour is 2 featured readers. So the open mic is like however many people, divide an hour by them, and that's how much time they have. And the featured readers get about a half hour. Or they do like open mic, 1 reader, break, open mic, 1 reader. It varies, but it's a wonderful community. I've been both an open mic and a featured reader, and they also have a writing workshop, and Ramona Ridgewell mentioned this in the comments. She writes, we use pretty much the same critique methods as Cliff mentioned at the 2-hour transport critique group. Direct message, Ramona, if you are interested in joining a private group. So if you're on Facebook, you can look for her comment, click through and DM Ramona and join that community. I joined that community even though I'm in San Jose and not Seattle, because it went virtual. And I knew some of the people who were running it because they were FogCon people, which was a convention that went through like literally days before lockdown. It's originally in San Francisco, but later in Walnut Creek in the East Bay. And it was heavy on writers. And a lot of those people that came down from like Portland and Seattle, from the Pacific Northwest, would come to FogCon, and I knew them, and they were doing this, and I was like, I want to hang out with these people and meet people that they know. And so I joined the 2-hour, and they had already released an anthology of writers, and then they released a second one, which came out from Fairwood Press, which is a wonderful independent press run by Patrick Swenson. And I am now in 2-hour Transport 2. I have a reprint in 2-hour Transport 2, all because of this community. And so that is even a different kind of model, the open mic model, which would be, a musician's community usually, or a slam poets community or whatever, is also, that's another kind of community, by the way, poetry writers. They're like poetry slams were created so that they would get out and stand in front of audiences and people would listen to poetry. So that's another kind of a thing. It's also competitive, so that's a different spin on things, because poetry slams are competitions, but still, it is a community of writers. So that's my shtick, and I'm gonna start the plugs by saying 2-hour Transport 2 anthology available now from Fairwood Press. Excellent set of stories, plus also something by me. Okay, Deborah, plug away.
Oh, I thought, does Claire have concluding comment?
Do you want to?
I think I'm good on concluding comments. Thank you.
I thought you just did I thought she just did a concluding.
Yeah. All right. So, just out is, let's see if I can get this so you can see it, is the last Darkover novel.
Move it a little to the side to get it. There you go.
Right.
There you go. Arlen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a love letter to fans for all of these years. I started working with Marion Zimmer Bradley in the last year of her life, and we talked about collaborating and the story we wanted to tell, and then she died. And turns out we shared a publisher and an agent, different editors, and they were thrilled with what I was doing, and they sent me a contract for 3 books, and then a contract for another 3 books, and then a contract for another 3 books, the last 2 of which have come out through her literary trust. And after 25 years, it is time for me to end it. And the trust was long since happy to, they never intended to be a publisher. So I'm returning to my original work, which actually I kept doing over this last 25 years.
Like, for example, Lambda finalist collaborators.
Pardon?
Like, for example, Lambda finalist collaborators.
Yeah, it was just a hoot to go to New York to the ceremony, and I think that's the best novel I've ever written. That one.
It is a darn good one.
Thank you. So I've got a new project. The working title is Many Teeth. It started as a novelette of swordswomen versus dinosaurs. And then it insisted on growing. So it was swordswoman versus dinosaurs versus evolved sapient dinosaurs. And then a critique group wanted more backstory of how my swordswoman and her mother, who she's rescuing, how did that relationship get to be so screwy? And in the process of doing backstory, my nomadic steppe horse people from Seven Petal Shield came galloping onto the scene with wonderful horses. So I'm almost done with that backstory arc that sets up a quest that takes them to the land of the dinosaurs. And I hope to be finished with this draft spring. That's a really generous goal for me. Not only do we have trees crashing down on us in the storm, but I have a 2-month-old bionic knee, which is why I'm moving around a lot because I have to go put ice on it, and that's really slowed things down. One of the things that I believe is, for me, is setting generous deadlines for myself, because I get crazy and I overwork if my deadlines are too tight. So I always set them so that I can achieve them easily, and then I feel great about myself. So
I'll also mention the trilogy of novels. The Seven Petal Shield is the first in a trilogy of original novels that she wrote with the same time as the Dark Ogre.
And other stuff.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yep. Claire, would you like to plug your collection or anything else?
Sure. Yes, right now the only book that is wholly by me that is available is excuse me, Twiceborn by my pen name, CL Kagm. Not maybe the easiest to spell choice of pen name I've ever made, but you can see it spelled on the screen right now. And I do have a novel draft that those of you who know me know that I have been kind of on pause for a few years because current events actually messed with my worldview really hard, which is a whole other situation. But this is one of the examples of the power of having a writers community, because Cliff is authorized to send dragons after me if I don't have any draft to him by the end of this month. So that
we will talk about that later.
yes, indeed.
I have them ready. They are
wait.
ready. One of them is downstairs.
But yes, several of these stories in the Twiceborn short story collection are part of a universe of novels that I think it's finally time for me to try to birth with some slightly updated world building. So,
right, that's another thing. I'll just note briefly that if you write a short story and decide to make a novel out of it or to use it as inspiration for your novel, you don't actually have to abide by everything you decided in the short story. You can change stuff. It's a parallel universe version of like Clark's The Sentinel doesn't take place in the same universe as 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, I should give a slight warning there, which is that I like to write harder science fiction, which also means that I sometimes accidentally do horror, because I will design something biologically, then go, oh, bodies aren't supposed to do that. So just a warning, it can get a little intense in Twiceborn. But
I am reminded of the Laurie Anderson statement at the beginning of one of her concert tours, where she would say, "Welcome to difficult listening hour."
Love it.
All right. And the thing I'm going to plug is other thing I'm going to plug is the fourth Wednesday of each month, except December, is the 2-hour transport critique group. Contact Ramona Ridgewell in the comments if you are interested. Anyway, over to you, Bob. I think we're done. We have beaten this subject into submission, or coaxed it with cookies and donuts and fresh croissants, and depending on whatever metaphor, I like the second one actually. And it's now time for you to talk about, gee, what do you have to plug? Or is BQ reading for anything right now? Is that a thing?
Actually, reading's a funky word for it. We're more like throw it in a sifter and see what floats to the top. The no, it's a fun thing, but I want to go back to what you said. I think, Deborah, you were a founding member of Bookview Cafe.
No, I came in a year later, and
okay. I just want to say that a great example of a writer community gone good.
It's a collective, but yes, a publishing collective and community.
It's a community of writers that has gone through lots of, it survived drama, it survived COVID, it's been good, and everyone I know that's part of it speaks well of it, and so you should be proud to be part of that.
Yeah, actually, I'm no longer part of it.
Well then you can't be proud anymore. You're gonna have to hang your head in shame.
I'm proud of what we do. For me, when Vonda McIntyre died, a lot of the heart went out of it for me, and some other people. But I'm still in touch with a lot of those folks, both the ones who stayed in BVC and the ones who left, and we're sort of a much looser community. But the idea of a cooperative publishing house run by authors with exchange of volunteer labor was just extraordinary. And we actually, one year, were no longer a small press because we put out so many original books.
Well, I just know that they impressed me. And when Vonda McIntyre passed, she left a big hole in BQ Press as well, because she helped us out, worked with us quite a bit, and miss it. And I've heard you mention Patrick, who has
Swenson.
It's Patrick Swenson, yeah.
I always want to call him Patrick Stewart, but he's too tall.
Like Patrick Stewart, Patrick Swenson has never been assimilated by the board.
Well, I don't know. I have been with him at Rainforest many times, and I think he's pretty close. But I just wanted to say that his Rainforest Writers Retreat is an incredible collection of writers who practice writing in a big common room as well as writing off by themselves. And if you ever get a chance to attend it, there's 3 sessions. Session 1 and 2 are almost always sold out, so get in if you can, but you will find it to be worth your while. And for example,
I've heard nothing but good things about that.
It is the location has got a certain degree of magic. If I believed in ley lines, I would say that this is a crosshatch of.
Where is the location for those unfamiliar?
It's up at Lake Quinault. It's a beautiful little lake up in the Olympic rainforest. First year we were there, it rained 20 inches.
So you had to stay inside and write.
No, it's a wonderful place to be. I cannot oversell it. And
Ramona also says it's a wonderful experience. And Ramona points out that the critique group is second Tuesday. It's the 2-hour transport open mic, and reading that is fourth Wednesday, which I would know if I'd had my calendar in front of me, but my brain cannot. This is my exocortex.
Critique groups are great. I ran a critique group for 20 years before I started BQ Press, and the everything I learned running that critique group has played into running BQ Press. It has been a wonderful thing. But
speaking of BQ Press, do you have a book you're reading for right now at BQ Press?
A book?
Yeah, that we're maybe accepting submissions.
Oh, we've got an anthology, but it's a fun anthology, and I
called Alternative Liberties. right now.
Boy, Cliff, you sure make it hard to get a word in edgewise.
You're not getting to the point, Bob.
I am not.
We're reading for Friday. Send us something.
I don't get to the point very easy. I'm a meandering soul sometimes. But I would say that Cliff is one of our editors.
For my sins.
But the fun part of it is BQ Press got its start when we published Alternative Truths. And it popped up to hit a niche, so to speak. And so we write a lot of political fiction, or publish a lot of political fiction. And when the Orange Baboon got elected president, and with the help of the, my God, Elon Musk has demonstrated that you can buy a co-presidency. Hey, don't expect me to say anything kind about those two assholes. And so we're just as blunt in our book, okay, the anthology. And so what we're doing is we're publishing an anthology about what the next 4 years potentially hold for us. And we have got some wonderful writers. I got one writer in there. This was her first pro sale ever. And we're paying 10 cents a word. And she came, she got accepted before Harry Turtledove did. While we like having great folks, one of my favorite things to do, since I did run the critique groups for so long, is just like you guys have pointed out, great writers do not necessarily have great big books on their resume or multiple sales. Sometimes they just haven't hit the right story to the right market at the right time. And so I am thrilled with the lineup we have, not just because it's got Jim Wright in it, but because it's got, oh God, my brain's gone dead. And when I tried to pull up my list of acceptances, it went blah. But anyway, we're reading through December 20th. And I'll tell you what, guys, we want political. We want funny, too, though. Very little about the next 10 years is going to be funny. Because now that the billionaires are firmly in charge, they're going to let Trump get his 2 years in. Then they're going to force him out, give us a new vice president, or the vice president will then be eligible for 10 more years, and he seems to be a perfect flunky. So, again, don't let me get going too much. But the idea is reading all of these stories. I don't know, Cliff, you've been reading them. It is enough to depress you. It makes you want to hide under your bed and hug your dog.
Yep.
These are some of the most depressing, scary stories I've ever read. I mean, I should charge people to be readers for this anthology. I mean,
So we should also mention that in addition to stories, we are accepting nonfiction, like essays and poetry.
Oh, yeah, we take poetry. I mean, don't let Andrew Roberts fool you. I mean, I see the ratings. I know where he sets in the rankings. And so I like to keep Andrew on edge, though. That's my evil part of me. But now I'm going to have to go send him an acceptance.
Right, you spoke yourself into a corner. Good.
It's okay. I do that occasionally. But anyway, we want humor, and right now we are
drowning in sorrow.
We don't have enough space to publish all the great stories we have. And so if you've got something, be succinct, be short, be humorous, give me redemption. I love redemption. One of the best stories we ever published was an English writer named Paula Hammond, who wrote us a story about a Donald J. Trump who didn't go to the orthopedist and get his deferral, went to Vietnam, turned into a good human being where all of his people management skills, people manipulation skills were put to good use. And it was his retirement party where they went over right before he ran for president as one of the most loved human beings in America. And nominated it for a Sideways Award. Apparently, not even they could handle that. But I tell you, I do love redemption. I love humor. So if you've got anything and you're putting it together, do that. And
Deadline is Friday.
Deadline is Friday. And I will tell you, if you've got something and you need a moment, there's only one person in the world that can give you that little extra time, and that is me. And I am not going to pretend that I'm going to do that, because still have 39 stories we haven't read, 20 stories on we really think we ought to buy this. Close to 30,000 words already bought, and so
that's a third of the book.
We can't buy everything we want to. It's just that freaking simple. But it's going to be a great book. It's got some great writers in it, and I just don't know how to say it other than if you've got something you want to see considered. I had one person sent me their story saying, "I'm sorry, I missed the deadline on a book," and I looked at that story and I increased the length of the book because of it. It was that good. Good writing is what we want. So thank you very much for being here, guys. You and Deborah, obviously, it's always good to have you on there. And CL, it is, what are we supposed to call you again?
You can call me Claire. It's easier to pronounce.
Okay,
and the C is for Claire. So
yeah, Claire, you've been good having you on here again too. And Cliff does this every month. And I will tell you something. Next month or next week will be after closure. Since we got first, third, and last Sunday of the month booked, next month is my freebie. And so, I get to do anything I want on that one. Well, except perhaps dance.
I was going to say tap dance, Bob. Tap dance.
No. My daughter's a good dancer.
My wife actually has taught tap dance, so come on down and learn crash course and then tap dance.
Hey, my granddaughter was in Newsies. She rocked. She put down her cane, jumped up on top of a table, tap danced up one end of the table and down the other, having never tap danced before. She learned during rehearsal.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a natural performer. Don't let her hear that, because she's supposed to be over here to help her grandma decorate the Christmas tree as soon as we're done. But thank you all, and happy holidays. And thank you, Deborah. And thank you guys for putting up with my rambling.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Bob, for creating this podcast.
Oh, it's fun. I mean, BQ Press is a family. And nothing pains me more than rejecting a work from someone who's in our circle. And it really does. I wish I had enough money and space and time to publish all the good things we get. But that said, I'm going to let you go. Say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
I knew Cliff would do that one.
Good night, Gracie.
Bye, Claire. Bye. Goodbye, Deborah.
Good work.
Okay.
Bye, wonderful community. See you next time.
Bye, BQ Press.